There are a number of reasons why digital transformations fail, but one of the most common root causes is probably one you're not thinking of, and that's what I'm going to talk about here today. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys. And when we think about digital transformation failures, you often think about things like poor project management, lack of scope management, customization of technology, lack of resources. Those certainly all contribute to failure. And in fact, I've put a number of videos on my YouTube channel that outline the reasons why digital transformations most commonly fail. But one thing I've not yet covered is how just we as humans naturally have human behavior that contributes to failure, unintentionally, of course. And so what I want to talk about today are what are those aspects of our human behavior and those blind spots that we all have as humans, how does that contribute to digital transformation? That's what I'm going to talk about here today. So we as humans in general are pretty optimistic, especially if we're in a position where we've advanced within an organization, we've been asked to be part of a digital transformation team. Chances are we're pretty optimistic, and that's part of what's gotten us to where we are in our careers. However, this can become a big problem when it comes to digital transformation because that optimism can actually turn on you and present a dark side to the transformation. Let me give you an example of what I mean by that. Let's just say you're looking at potential technologies, potential system integrators, potential implementation proposals for how your digital transformation might look. You're going to get a bunch of sales reps that are very optimistic, that are putting in front of you overly optimistic scenarios of what your transformation might look like. We as optimistic humans are going to think that sounds great and that seems very achievable and doable. And while we want to be optimistic and be aggressive in our implementations and our transformations, chances are very high that we're going to be overly optimistic and underestimate the time, the effort, the risk, the cost, the resource commitments. We're going to underestimate that stuff because we're overly optimistic. And now we've got sales reps from the software vendors that are feeding into that optimism. So that over-optimism really needs to be tempered with just a bit of pessimism or skepticism in order to be successful. And it may sound counterintuitive, it may sound like something you're not comfortable doing, but you have to do it in order to identify the risks and to better understand what an implementation is really going to look like in terms of time, cost, risk, resources, expected business benefits, all that good stuff. So really be cognizant of this as you're going through your digital transformation and be watching for those signs of over-optimism along the way. When most organizations go through digital transformations, they don't have a lot of experience going through the transformations. They may have been through one or two in the past, or you may have a few team members on your team that have been through a transformation in the past. But in general, across your hundreds or thousands of employees, chances are pretty high that you don't have a lot of experience in-house, which is why you turn to experts. You turn to companies like Third Stage or like a system integrator, like a software vendor, people to advise you on how to become successful in your digital transformation. And so what ends up happening is when you combine the over-optimism that I just talked about with the fact that we're trusting the experts to a high degree, now all of a sudden you've created another blind spot where you're trusting what the experts are telling you, who are also overly optimistic, feeding into your over-optimism, and you're trusting them that they're giving you the right answer. And more often than not, especially when you're talking to a system integrator and a software vendor, more often than not, they're going to tell you that the implementation is going to take less time, less money, less resources, less risk than it really will. But the problem is you don't have the knowledge and the experience in-house to know to call BS on that or to call them out on that over-optimism. So trusting the experts is good when done in moderation, but you also have to challenge the experts. You have to make sure that you're doing what's best for you as an organization and being sure you're being realistic about what's going to make the most sense for your organization. And some of the ways you might do that would be, first of all, to understand your culture. You know, what kind of culture do you have today? How risk adverse are you? How much tolerance for risk do you have? And also, what are the change impacts to your organization going to be? Because all those dimensions are just a few examples of what's going to determine how long the project is going to take, how much it's going to cost, what the risk will be, and what the resource commitments will be. So those are just a few variables that can factor into having a better understanding and a way to temper the information and guidance you might be getting from outside experts. We as humans suffer from this phenomena where we hear what we want to hear oftentimes. We have our own biases. And this is true not just for your external consultants who are trying to sell you something. or your external software vendors who are trying to prove to you that their software is the best thing since sliced bread, but it's also true for your own internal team as well. Your internal people have blind spots and limitations to what they know. They have their own biases of things that they've seen work or not work in the past, and that can create some blind spots when it comes to decision making and the way you execute and your overall strategy for your digital transformation. So watch out for those sorts of biases, because this is something that can be very destructive and very harmful to a digital transformation. Just to give you an example, oftentimes we have clients who are looking to deploy single enterprise-wide ERP systems for their entire organization. And their goal is to automate everything start to finish, all of their end-to-end business processes. Those are examples of things that our clients are often trying to achieve. But what ends up happening is you get overzealous software vendors and sales reps that come in and tell you that yes, their software can do everything you want it to do, and they've got their own bias because they're trying to sell you software. You've got your bias because it is what you want to hear. You want to hear that they've got a solution that'll solve all your problems. They are providing the silver bullet, allegedly, that's going to solve those problems. And it creates a bias and it creates a blind spot when it comes to executing on that strategy. So just make sure that you are aware of these biases and you find ways to cut through those biases as you go through your transformation. Another common blind spot from a human perspective is the concept of groupthink. So what I mean by that is organizations tend to hear from multiple people the same thing, and they start to think that it's true, and they start to think the same way like everyone else that they're interacting with. So you could have a project team that's huddled up in a war room or a project team room for months and years on end, and you start to become somewhat insulated and you start to feed off each other and only hear what the perspectives are of that team. You also start to hear the same thing from multiple consultants and system integrators and software vendors. They start telling you a very common message that supports them and is in their best interest, but that becomes your reality or your perceived reality. But the reality oftentimes is that there's other stuff happening outside of your four walls of your project team and your software vendors. There's other stuff happening. There's other risks out there that you often fail to see because you have this groupthink. You have this way of thinking that everything's okay and everyone's very positive and optimistic. Everyone's excited about the project. We're working through all the design and technical issues, so therefore everything must be fine from an overall transformation perspective. What that does is it causes us to fail to see where the risks are, and it causes us to fail to mitigate those risks until it's too late, at which point usually you can't fix those risks. So that's something to keep in mind as well, as the whole concept of groupthink, which is similar to bias in many ways, but it's a little bit different too, in that just because you have 5 or 10 or 20 people on your team saying the same thing doesn't necessarily mean it's true. So you really want to dig beneath the surface of what's really happening outside the four walls of your project team to understand what some of those risks really are throughout the organization. Another human behavior component at play in many digital transformation that can lead to failure is this whole dynamic of covering your own, the CYA phenomena. In other words, if I'm a CIO or a project manager and I'm in charge of a transformation, I want to make myself look good. I want to make my team look good. And so therefore, I'm going to paint an overly rosy or optimistic picture of how things are going. And when there are risks, or to the extent that I understand what the risks are, I might downplay those risks a bit, try to sweep them under the rug, try to deal with them on my own so that I don't create unnecessary concern or fear within the organization, particularly among my peers and superiors. So this CYA phenomena is very real throughout organizations. It's something that can be very damaging, and it's a big blind spot for organizations as well. It's certainly understandable, but something we need to be aware of as we go through our transformations. When you think about digital transformations across an enterprise, you think about all the different things that go into a transformation. You have technical issues, business process issues, organizational change issues, project management, risk management, data migration, solution architecture, managing consultants, procurements, contracts, all that stuff that you've got to manage as part of a digital transformation. It's a lot for any one person or even one team to manage. And one of the failure points that we see that relates back to human behavior is our difficulty grasping all of these different moving parts and understanding the big picture of how they all tie together. And that's a key role that we oftentimes play with our clients, is helping them understand what that big picture is, how decisions they make over here might affect downstream decisions over here, or how risks might be mitigated in one area, or how risk might be increasing in other areas, and really just having that experience and foresight to understand what is happening in the big picture and where the risks are and where the opportunities for improvement are. So that failure to see the big picture is another common dynamic we see and another human behavior risk that's inherent in every digital transformation we see. Perhaps the biggest human dynamic at play here in digital transformation failure is the fact that we just don't like change. Doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter how much you're involved with change management or how many times you've been through digital transformations or how much of a visionary you are. The reality is in general, we as humans don't like to change, or at the very least, we struggle with change. We struggle to adapt to change. And that more than anything creates a lot of problems, not just for you as a project team or for your executive sponsors, but for every single person that's going to somehow be affected by the digital transformation. And this is why organizational change management is the single most critical thing that needs to be addressed as part of a digital transformation. It's because we don't like change, it's not pleasant, we typically resist it even if we're not trying to sabotage or we're not trying to intentionally resist changes, we just do. And so it's important to have a very solid and effective organizational change strategy as part of your digital transformation. In fact, I would argue that's much more important than the technology you pick or the way you deploy technologies or even the way you design your business processes. The way you manage change is going to be critical because of this and other human dynamics that I've mentioned throughout this discussion. So I hope this has given you some things to think about as you think about why your digital transformation might be at risk or what some of the risks and pitfalls may be along the way. But I've also included a link to a guide to organizational change management. This is a guide that provides other organizational and human-focused digital transformation best practices to help you through your change management and overall digital transformation journey. And I've also included a link to our annual digital transformation report, which provides best practices for how to make your transformation successful in general, as well as other software reviews and independent rankings of different technologies as well. So I encourage you to check out those two resources as well as other resources I've included links to in the description of this video. So I hope you found this information useful. Hope you have a great day.